Hi, my name is Kerry Brown and I'm Professor of Employment and Industry in the School of Business and Law at Edith Cowan University. Before we begin, I would like to go through some housekeeping with you. Welcome, and ECU respectfully acknowledges the past and present traditional custodians of this land on which we are meeting, the Noongar elders and people. If you want to join in, click the Q&A button on the right side of the screen to ask the presenter a question. We will endeavour to answer all your questions, but we might not have enough time to do the entire list of questions. A link will be made available of the recording post-event, and we'll also ask you to provide feedback via a survey. Thanks. The aspects I'd like to cover in our discussion are first defining the gig economy and who are the gig workers. Then I want to outline some of what's happening under COVID-19 conditions, and I'll conclude with some commentary about the future, how the future of work is being shaped by COVID-19. In terms of the gig economy and who are the gig workers, the gig economy has arisen as part of a drive for leaner, more flexible work arrangements for workers and business. It's been accelerated by disruptive innovation created as part of sharing platforms or the sharing economy, such as well-known names as Uber. The concept of working a gig comes from the arts industry, but gig workers are contractors, freelancers, project-based workers, and short-term workers. The gig workers are that we probably know best are the Uber drivers, food delivery workers, call centre operators and couriers. However, there are professionals including management consultants, architects, software engineers, graphic designers, accountants. All types of workers may be classed as gig workers if their status is not as an employee of an employing organisation. And this aspect is an important distinction that's often played out in industrial commissions to determine whether or not a worker is an independent contractor or an employee because of their different rights and responsibilities. The promise of the gig economy was unfettered access to jobs that delivered work at your own pace, on your own terms, and with work-life balance. It was premised on flexible work and the opportunity to be your own boss. However, issues of worker exploitation and problems of a fragmented labour market are suggested to characterise the gig economy. Dr. Tom Barrett from ECU and his colleagues found in their research into the gig economy that hyperflexibility was overstated, as food delivery drivers had only limited ability to make choices about work allocation, timing, and delivery schedules. Richard Glover, in his 2019 book, The Land Before Avocado, referred to the gig economy as the phrase people use when they're trying to create a hip feeling around the destruction of workers' rights. Gig jobs tend to be characterised by short-term, insecure contracts or can be casual employees, and these lack sick pay, holiday pay, the stability of weekly hours, all the benefits of permanent jobs. They're considered more vulnerable workers, and this aspect is also a vulnerability in COVID-19 conditions. In 2017, it was estimated over 2/3 of Australians participated in the sharing economy in some way, with its impact expected to nearly quadruple in 4 years, from 15.1 billion in 2017 to around 55 billion by 2021. Now, that may have been overestimated in that account, but figures vary, and somewhere in the vicinity of $30 billion is accountable to the gig economy. In 2018, around a quarter of Australia's workforce were employed on a casual basis. So you see the impact would be deep in that sector. Any adverse effects to this sector has then direct effects to the economy because of the sheer size and magnitude of the sector. Also, we're finding there are spillover effects or knock-on effects. Any sector relies on other businesses, either upstream or downstream, from sourcing parts or suppliers for products and services to selling to other businesses. So any broken link in this chain can have catastrophic effects for businesses along that chain. Suppliers to restaurants have perishable stock, and if cafes and restaurants cannot find a way to trade, then those suppliers are lost. So we'll take a look at what's happening under COVID-19. We obviously have an unprecedented, new and emerging situation in which flow-on effects will be felt for months and then years. Government regulations supporting geographic lockdowns and restrictions on trading, social distancing, the new word for the decade, and requirements to remain at home are key initiatives to combat the virus, but obviously have devastating effects on other aspects of business and the economy. So the tensions between business imperatives to operate within the economy and community imperatives to remain healthy and safe are extremely challenging, and governments are dealing with this on a daily basis. The Australian Bureau of Statistics has been preparing COVID-19 specific reports to monitor economic effects of the virus. Between the week ending the 14th of March 2020, which was the week Australia recorded its 100th confirmed COVID-19 case, and the week ending 18th of April 2020, which is just over 1 month, employee jobs decreased by 7.5%, total wages paid decreased by 8.2%. And just on a snapshot basis, between the week ending 11th of April 2020 and the week ending the 18th of April 2020, employee jobs decreased by 1.5% compared to a decrease of 0.3% in the previous week, and total wages paid decreased by 1% compared to a decrease of 1.6% in the previous week. It seems that the JobKeeper subsidy might have been kicking in at that point. So in an historic move, a wage subsidy was introduced as a mechanism to keep employees in jobs. A new program, JobKeeper, was instituted with payments of up to $1,500 per fortnight put in place by the Morrison government in consultation with the Australian Council of Trade Unions. This is recognition that not only did the economy need to be stimulated, but that wage earners needed to remain in jobs, as unemployment on such an unprecedented scale as retail shops, hospitality and service industries closed, and that became too destructive to the economy. The flexibility and often online operation and at-home arrangements of gig workers appear at first glance to be ideally suited to adapting to COVID-19 conditions. However, there are specific and challenging issues as the gig sector is so diverse and ubiquitous these days. Research by Spurk and Straub, reported in the Journal of Vocational Behaviour, April 2020, so it's only just out, specifically points to the challenges created by COVID-19 because of the ambiguous status of gig workers. They are not officially laid off, they do not have access to leave, health insurance or entitlements. They are really unprotected workers. However, the authors find that work-on-demand workers who complete and deliver tasks offline and may be identified as system relevant during the pandemic are actually in demand. Warehouse workers, postal and food delivery workers, as well as healthcare professionals, are included in these boom sectors. Forbes reported in March 2020 that over 100,000 workers were recruited to work at Amazon US in their delivery section. So you can see the shifts that are occurring in the economy. Uber encouraged their drivers to transition to food courier for Uber Eats, with an increase in 15% of drivers. And so as Uber rides reduced by over 90% in the US since March. So another transition occurred with those delivery drivers. As Spurk and Straub acknowledge, food delivery services, for example, are in high demand, and these workers may not fear income or job loss, but may fear falling ill or being unable to work. Supply chain fragility was an early manifestation of the vulnerabilities of an interconnected global system from the early days of COVID-19. The strange case of the disappearing toilet paper written about by our ECU colleague Dr. Flavio Macau in The Conversation recently is a case in point. The key message is that supply and demand works well enough in normal times, but panic buying and hoarding of goods delivered through supply chains with long chains such as international components are extremely problematic in a crisis. The World Health Organization reported on the 21st of April 2020 about global market shortages in critical supplies required for the global COVID-19 response, including shortages of oxygen, gloves, masks and other protective medical equipment. Workers in these sectors are integral to the recovery efforts, and failure of medical supply chains is a critical system failure and dangerous to the workers and to the general community. I wanted to talk about a couple of cases now, and this is just in terms of Australia. And the case of Australia Post and delivery drivers is an interesting one for us. In an email to customers on the 8th of May 2020, Australia Post announced it was processing up to 2 million parcels a day, with volumes exceeding even the busiest Christmas period. Heavy volumes, significantly reduced number of flights and social distancing in facilities has led to delays. But what they have done is that facilities are operating 24/7, drivers are delivering on weekends. There's 15 new or repurposed processing facilities, 8 extra flights per day within Australia, bringing a total of 17 air freighter flights per day, and hundreds of casual staff have been recruited into the network and contact centres. The other case I wanted to talk about was the case of Airbnb, the platform provider in the sharing economy, well known to us. And the message from Airbnb CEO Brian Chesky on the 5th of May 2020 announced significant staff layoffs and reductions in business activities. Out of 7,500 Airbnb employees, nearly 1,900 will leave Airbnb. That's approximately 25% of the workforce. Promised a more focused business and back to people who host in their homes and offer experiences. He acknowledged that travel in this new world will look different, and the focus on providing travel options closer to home, safer and more affordable will be their focus. No longer they will pursue business options in transportation, Airbnb studios, and they were scaling back, moving into the hotel sector. So now I wanted to talk about the future and how the future of work is being shaped by COVID-19. And I'll continue with CEO Brian Chesky, who stated that Airbnb faced 2 hard truths. One is that we don't know exactly when travel will return, and 2, when travel does return, it will look different. And these are also the hard truths for tourism industry, the hospitality, retail trade, event industry, industries that are heavily populated by gig workers. The airline industry is almost at a standstill. Virgin Airlines in administration, thousands of workers have lost jobs, and not only gig workers. COVID-19 has brought home the risks of outsourcing production across the globe and service by unattached workers on contracts. Industry does not get these benefits for free. When borders close or production is interrupted, there may be a high cost for those decisions. The Minister for Industry, Science and Technology, Karen Andrews, in a recent ABC interview stated, supply chains need to meet our manufacturing needs within Australia. So to minimise the risk of being unable to source international products, focus attention on how to build self-sufficiency in supply chains, and shorter supply chains is needed to understand how to do that. The type of work and under what conditions people undertake that work, then to achieve that self-sufficiency, is also important to investigate. Just wanted to make some comments about avoiding the second wave of spread. Our easygoing lifestyle of event entertainment, dining out and socialising in large freewheeling groups, and our ability to get on a plane as easy as getting into a car needs radical rethinking. Our close contact existences, along with the assumptions that our work would follow that agile and flexible path, has shown to be deficient in a crisis. We are now more wary of close interaction and should stay more vigilant. However, our experience has shown that it is possible to move whole operations online, like the university system, that we can work from home and we can commute using bicycles, and even pop up a bicycle lane in cities around the world to be able to do that. We have a question about how likely do you think that I think that the Fair Work Act will be amended to include independent contractors. I think this one will take a long time to build into our system, because we see in the UK that they're looking to have dependent contractors, a notion of dependent contractors. So this might change our thinking about a middle road for understanding whether or not we have independent contractors or employees. That perhaps the British example of dependent contractors will help us. So contactless and low-touch operations should continue as a standard offering in business, and there will be ways of managing remote working and working practices to support this approach that are suited to the gig economy. There remains a need for flexibility to respond to business and workers' needs, but this flexibility needs to be tempered with a risk mitigation approach that acknowledges system vulnerabilities. As parents removed children from childcare, it was soon realised that the childcare system was on the brink of collapse, and without government assistance in the form of free childcare, the childcare industry could not gear back up in time to support working parents when the pandemic conditions eased, and would create another type of crisis. In summary, while there were good prospects for a system based on disruptive innovation and built on flexibility to withstand the COVID-19 crisis, the effects have been uneven and dramatic. There is a price to be paid for uncertainty in income and a lack of safety net in employee conditions. As in the good times, we can cope with this. Governments and business are finding out just how much it costs with those rescue packages in the billions of dollars. Out of the crisis, there have been calls for stronger safety nets for gig economy workers globally. COVID-19 has shown in sharp relief that the precarious situation of gig workers, especially in terms of the lack of sick pay, lack of provisions for redundancy, and inability to control the conditions under which workers performed in the risk conditions of a pandemic. Government regulation remains an important lever with which to develop a coordinated response to a crisis of the scale and scope of a pandemic, and the JobKeeper program has shown us that the governments and unions can work together to support workers. Communities have actually shifted in entire economies to deal with the conditions of the pandemic, and the pandemic has brought home that an economy not only needs producers as a key part of the system, but it also needs consumers, and those consumers need a job to participate in the economy. Thank you. Do I see any other changes that are needed in terms of legislation? I think we've seen lots of changes as the government has put in place regulations to deal with business and to deal with how we interact in public. And as these play out over time, we will, I'm sure, see test cases and opportunities come through our industrial commissions. So at the moment, the forum and the regulatory processes have been through government legislation in other arenas, particularly around business legislation, but I see that we have the opportunity to support workers with greater legislation through the Industrial Relations Commission. In terms of what next for casual workers, particularly those who have lost their jobs, due to the pandemic. Where do they direct their efforts next? So I've gone through some of the on-demand type jobs that casual workers are able to move into, and the way in which Uber and Uber drivers in the taxi area, moving people around in share driving, had to move to a different kind of a model and different kind of supply situation when they moved to areas of food delivery. Now, I think that retraining and training has a big part to play in this, and that the government will be looking to ways in which to support people, because normally an economy has around between 3 and 6 or even 7% unemployment. An economy can kind of deal with that. There's structural unemployment within an economy that doesn't require large-scale programs to keep the economy running, and it then falls to individuals to build themselves into jobs and into situations in the economy. What happened with COVID-19 was that it became absolutely and utterly clear that this structural adjustment needed macro levers of the government to keep the whole economy going. The example I used about the childcare centres was that individual parents removed their kids one by one as they started worrying about the health effects and the gathering of children in a childcare centre. And so those individual decisions actually created a huge impact across the childcare industry. So it means that those areas where there are huge impacts, there needs to be some policy or regulatory implementation. So retraining, studying, reworking, these are areas that are really important. And the JobKeeper was really an historic moment where the government and the ACTU, for the first time in a very long time, started working together on a very productive program. Okay, we don't seem to, I think we are coming up for time, so we might close off there if there aren't any further questions. Okay, thank you very much. And if you want to be in contact with me, please email me at my email address at Edith, Cowan University.